Okay, good morning and welcome. My name is Carson Gorecki. I am the Regional Labor Market Analyst for Northeast Minnesota. There are 6 planning regions in Deed's infrastructure, so there are 6 of us throughout the state that are meant to serve as liaisons and resources for anybody that can use labor market information. What is labor market information? It can be anything from the most common things that you see in the newspaper every month, such as unemployment rates, jobs numbers, wages, all the way to any demographic information that impacts the economy. So anything that has to do with people and the economy, we work with that. So it's a pretty broad array of information. And today, we're going to walk through some of the more common stuff that is used by workforce development, HR, and education professionals. What is DEED? DEED is the Minnesota agency responsible for economic and workforce development, the Department of Employment and Economic Development. And so we cover a whole array of things, but we give out money to other organizations throughout the state. We help manage workforce development and economic development throughout the state, but largely to promote prosperity in Minnesota. So whether that be helping organizations or individuals, DEED has a hand in that type of work. What are we doing today? I'm going to give a brief introduction to DEED, as I just did, and some of the labor market information concepts. I'm going to go through a brief labor market update using some of those concepts, and also using some of the tools that I'm going to discuss, so I can kind of show you how I use the information most commonly. And then we're going to walk through some of the most common tools that are relevant to workforce development professionals, HR professionals, folks working in education. The ones that I am aiming to get to today, I say aiming because almost inevitably I put too much on my plate and just get so into talking about the details and answering questions that can't always get to what I plan, but the 4 that I really hope to get to are underlined in bold there. Occupational employment and wage statistics, occupation and demand, job vacancy survey, and then graduate employment outcomes and the associated tools. I'll explain what that means when we get to it. And then if I'm extra efficient, we got some more tools that we can discuss at the end. Labor Market Information Office, I discussed a little bit about what we do already, those common statistics that we produce, but really we're meant to be a source and resource for anybody, any organization in Minnesota to make sound decisions. We promote the data and the use of the data to make well-informed decisions and market responsive planning. And we aim to guide you in doing that. So if you take away anything today, just know that we are here and a resource for you. Right. What are some of the tools that we do produce? We have over 24 data tools. Some of them are combined with each other. But at large, there are 2 different types of data that are presented in these tools. We have survey-based data. So an example of that would be our current employment statistics. So that's the jobs numbers that come out every month. And that's based off a survey of businesses and then a survey of households every month across the US via the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And then it's catered to Minnesota specific trends. Occupational employment and wage statistics, which we'll talk about. Another example of a survey based information source. So we survey businesses throughout the state and get information on their wages and employment. And then the other type of information we produce is census or administrative data. So census is basically a survey of everybody. And then administrative data we get from a really good example of this is the unemployment insurance statistics program. So every business that pays into unemployment insurance also includes information on their number of workers, what they're paid, and then what industry they're in. And we can use that to produce this really rich data on industries and employment, which I'll be covering in more detail next week in the next session, but we're not going to talk about that a ton today. What do we do with all this information? We give a lot of presentations to all sorts of groups, workforce development boards, economic development agencies, chambers of commerce, individual businesses. I present to high schools and colleges. We collaborate with other stakeholders, so people like universities doing research, workforce development boards, trying to do a little research as well. We also do data publications in our own research. Trends is a very common publication or popular publication that we put out every quarter. Employment Review is our monthly publication. We write blogs every month on topics that are of interest kind of in the moment. And actually OEWS, Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics, was just released with 2024 data. So my blog this month was about OEWS. We also answer data requests. So I get data requests on, what's a specific median wage for this occupation, things like that, which I actually really enjoy. And then we create new tools. So using the data that exists, trying to find ways to add value. I'll just throw up this briefly. We have a bunch of different jurisdictions. Each data tool kind of has its own jurisdiction. So when I talk about workforce development areas, economic development regions, planning areas, or planning regions, you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. I'll make sure to kind of mention which ones are relevant to the specific tool. But when I talk about Northeast Minnesota, that's the planning region in the upper right. Conveniently, it also coincides with the economic development region. So economic development region 3 is the same thing as planning region Northeast. And then there are 2 workforce development areas up here in Northeast Minnesota, 3 and 4. 4 is the city of Duluth, and then 3 is the rest of the region outside of the city boundaries. Where do these data come from? All sorts of different sources. Census Bureau is a big one, Bureau of Labor Statistics, other state agencies, Minnesota Works, Federal Reserve Bank, just to name a few. We pull from all these different sources to get the best information available, the most current information available. But then we also produce some of these data ourselves. Okay, jumping now into some of the core concepts, just to lay the groundwork of what we're going to be talking about. I talk about the labor force a lot, but want to make sure that we're all on the same page of what that definition of a labor force is. So when I talk about the labor force, I'm talking about the civilian non-institutional population age 16 or older. And if you're in the labor force, you're either working or unemployed, i.e. actively looking for work. So that gray box is the universe of folks that are eligible to be in the labor force. And then there's 2 ways that they can be in the labor force. But then you can break it down in a bunch of different pieces. And if you're not employed or unemployed, meaning you haven't looked for work in the last 4 weeks, you're considered to be out of the labor force. And that's what this box and flow chart. I love a good flow chart. That's what this is depicting. People not in the labor force, also broken out into different pieces. Get into the details if you really want. I'm happy to dive into the wonkiness, but just know that when I talk about the labor force, you know what I'm talking about. People that basically are not in an institution like prison, over 16 or older, you're basically eligible to be in the labor force. Unemployment is another really common term that gets thrown around, but contrary to popular perception, there's actually a bunch of different ways you can define unemployment. The unemployment rate that we publish every month is based off of what we call the U3 or official unemployment rate. And there's a spectrum of unemployment that goes from very narrow, just long-term unemployment, the U1 rate, all the way down to very broad, which includes those that are working, but only for part-time for economic reasons. Those people that are not in the labor force, but do want a job, so they haven't looked in the last 4 weeks, call those folks discouraged workers as well. But we're talking about a slightly narrower definition. It's long-term unemployed, folks that have completed recent jobs or kind of in between jobs, and then just your typical folks that are looking for work and have looked for work in the last 4 weeks. So that's the U3 rate. All right, now that we've got a handle on those core concepts, we're going to apply them and talk about what the labor market is up to currently. I want to say that my favorite one here is the percentage of chart which resembles Pac-Man. If you're nerdy about charts, that one always gives me a good giggle. Okay, so this is showing the most current unemployment rate information for Minnesota by workforce development area on the left and then by county on the right. Despite the red dominance in the left, we actually have historically low unemployment. So that's just relative to the rest of the state. But 4.7 is quite low for the workforce development area in Northeast Minnesota. So we still have quite low rates throughout the state. And then you can see how it varies by county on the right. And Northeast Minnesota, we have a pretty big range of unemployment as of March, but that is not anything that is too new to the region. Statewide, so now that we know what labor force represents, that blue line on top is the number of folks in the labor force. Orange line represents the number of employed individuals, whether they have one or more jobs. And then the gray bar basically represents the difference between those two. So that's the unemployment rate. Those are the people that are not employed but actively looking for work. You can see that compared to pre-recession, we actually have a lower unemployment rates and have consistently since the onset of the pandemic. The low point of that was in early 2022, but we still remain below 3%, which is the typical definition of full employment. Labor force participation rate, so that's the share of those folks that are 16 plus non-institutional that are in the labor force. You can see it was very high early 2000s, and we've seen it decline since then. At the same time, the total number of people in the labor force has grown. So that means that our population has been growing over that time. So we're making up with that deficit of participation and just more people eligible to be in the labor force. The decline in labor force participation largely has to do with the aging of the workforce, people retiring. But you can see during the pandemic, 2019, 2020, 2021, that's where we saw the decline in labor force participation, and we have recovered, but not completely. More locally, so this is looking at Northeast Minnesota, similar trend, but the deficit in the labor force was even a bit relatively larger, and it remains so. We have recovered just partially and then kind of plateaued the last year, as you can see with the blue line. But at the same time, unemployment, as you can see, remains historically low. 3.8% average in 2023, 3.6 in 2022. And you can see how that compares to pre-pandemic levels. And we actually had relatively low unemployment going into the pandemic-induced recession in Northeast Minnesota, but exacerbated even more so. So you put all those together, and what do you get? You get a tight labor market. So this chart here is showing you unemployment in the blue line, and then the orange bars represent the number of job vacancies by quarter. So the ratio of unemployed individuals, job seekers, to job vacancies is the black dots. In 2009, you could see, thanks for the comment. I will, yes, make sure to send and share out the presentation to everybody on the email list. So thank you for that. And it is recorded too, so I'll make sure to share the link. So a high of job seekers per vacancy in 2009 at the peak of the Great Recession. So we had, what that means is that we had 8 people looking for work on average for every job opening in the state. So that was a very friendly climate to employers. They could kind of have their pick of job candidates. There were more people to choose from. The competition was among the job seekers. Then you can see since then, very quickly, it has become the opposite scenario, where we have fewer people looking for work among many job vacancies. So the blue lines come down, the orange bar's gone up, and now post-pandemic, we are in this very tight labor market situation where we have about 2 job openings for every individual job seeker. And I will add that this chart doesn't get into matching. So does that individual job seeker have the skills, experience, desire to match up with that specific job opening? So if anything, it was tighter than this even indicates. We have seen more recently some loosening of the job market. So hopefully it starts to match up a little bit better. But right now it is very friendly still to job seekers. Talking about employment, so related to all of this, we have seen a full recovery to pre-pandemic levels statewide, but it took 42 months to get there. So it was Very quick initially, a very quick drop, basically over a month. Lost tens of thousands of jobs basically overnight, and then we've been building it back ever since, pretty steadily statewide. However, for Northeast Minnesota, specifically the Duluth Superior Metro, the just like the labor force recovery, the employment recovery remains incomplete. So we're still about 5,100 jobs below where we were pre-pandemic in early 2000, late 2019. So that's down 3.6%. And perhaps even more concerning, we've added 0 jobs over the year as of March 2024. So very flat recovery, maybe a plateau at this point. Um, Wages are the other thing that we can talk about on a monthly basis. And more positively, we've seen wage growth of 4.4% over the year. This is for the Duluth Metro, and that has outpaced the CPI, which is our measure of inflation. So up through recently, we've actually seen wages grow a little bit faster than prices. All right, I'll pause here for a second. Any questions on anything I've covered so far? All right, no worries. No worries. We'll keep going. All right, another LMI core concept that'll become relevant here is industries versus occupations. The best way I can describe this is an industry describes what the business or organization, the employer does. So you're a manufacturer, you're a construction firm, you're in mining. That's what the business does. An occupation is describing what the individual worker does. So you have production workers that may work for a manufacturing firm, but a really good example is, say, an accountant. An accountant. An accountant is an occupation, but an accountant can work in any industry. So you can have accountants for manufacturers, healthcare providers, leisure and hospitality, hotels, bars, etc. So occupations sometimes are similar to industry, like a lot of the healthcare support and practitioners tend to line up. A lot of them work in healthcare and social assistance industry, but they are not exactly the same. Breaking it out as some examples. So in the healthcare and social assistance sector, that's an industry, these are the top occupations. So as I mentioned, a lot of them are specifically healthcare, so they line up really well. However, you do see some examples such as food servers, non-restaurant. That's a very common healthcare industry occupation because you have a lot of cafeterias, et cetera, serving patients, staff. Another example is social and human service assistants and office clerks, not necessarily unique to healthcare. And then when you look at manufacturing occupations, you see a lot of production occupations in there. But most of them are folks that are like working on the line or such as industrial engineers doing design. Uh, but this is just to show you that there's a real diversity of occupation by industry. So now we know kind of what industries mean. Sectors are the largest grouping of those industries. And we had quite the divergent outcomes in Northeast Minnesota and statewide, but this is for Northeast Minnesota, by industry sector employment outcomes. So from 2019 to 2023, the pandemic period basically, um, we call these goods producing sectors. So construction, manufacturing, mining, they tended to perform well. They were less impacted by the impacts of the pandemic. Service providing sectors fared less well. So that's your leisure and hospitality, healthcare, um, educational services, other services. So you can see that the average was a decline of 3.7% of employment. And 4 industries sectors actually grew over the 4 years, but those were kind of the exception. And professional, scientific, and technical, that is a service providing sector, but it is very closely aligned with construction, with manufacturing, with mining. Utilities is the same. So you can see that most sectors declined over those 4 years. At the bottom, information has been a long-term decline. Management, arts, entertainment, and recreation, and combination food services were some of the ones that were hit hardest, and they still have deficits through the end of 2023. Okay, So that was your brief labor market update. Now we're going to dive into the tools themselves. Um, I'll pause here again for questions and for a chance to put the link to the data into the chat, if I can do this correctly. Any questions so far? Awkward link, but that is the link to our data page. So we're going to start from there. Okay, so just a few kind of tips. There's several different ways you can get to our data tools. One way is just to Google or web search mn.gov data tools, or you can use the link I sent, the data, and then go to data tools. If you want to just go to the Deed home webpage, you can do that too. Then go Deed homepage, data tools. You'll see the drop down across the top. And when you do get to data tools, it'll look like the image here in the presentation. You'll have a gray bar on the left that'll list all the different data tools and all the links in the data page, but we're focusing on the data tools. And then you'll have a little bit more information, detailed information and descriptor next to the data tools in the main body of the page. You can search, do a web search if you know what type of tool you're looking for, kind of add that to that search on the top, Laos, QCW, etc. Or you can just click on the links here for any of them, either in the gray bar or the blue links in the body of the page. Some more tips and tricks for navigating our site, which we'll show you live here in a sec. Keep an eye out for that left navigation bar, that gray one I just talked about. When you get to a tool, the tool landing page, which is where you get when you click on the link to the tool, it's not often the actual tool itself. We usually have a page that folks can get to where it describes what the tool does. It has some resources, some tutorials, some videos on how to use the tool, how to navigate the tool. But don't be fooled. We often have some visualizations that are below the introduction to the tool. And many times folks will think that that is the tool itself. That is just meant to be kind of a summarization of the data in the actual tool. And if that works for you and gets you what you need, that's fantastic. That's kind of what that's for. It's for folks that just need kind of a high level summarization of some of the data in the tool. We tried to create those because sometimes our tools look a little bit dated and can be a little bit harder to navigate. So we created these more visually appealing and easy to navigate tools. And I'll show you what that looks like as well. Look for links to more information, as I mentioned. We have those training and tutorials. And then if you're ever in a tool and want to go back, we should always have a little data home or tool name home that you can go back to where you started if you got to a place where you didn't want to be or you want to go start over. Okay, let's open it up. So I clicked on the link in the chat. This is the data center, data tools. We'll zoom in a little bit. Data tools here in the left. All the different data tools are available. So just showing you how to navigate, and then other things related to tools, monthly highlights, publications, economic analysis, a lot of great resources. The first tool that we are going to cover is called Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics, or OEWS. So this is the core of our occupational data. So what the individual workers are doing, and it includes the base of it is in the name, so it's employment by occupation, and it's also wages. The wage data is the most detailed data we have for occupations, and is the source for a lot of the other tools that deal with occupations. So for the workforce development network, for HR folks trying to set wages, remain competitive, this is the best source for that type of information. And it also breaks it down by industry, those regions, planning regions I talked about, economic development regions, and MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas, of which we have 8 in or partially in Minnesota. It'll give you detailed occupational data. I'm going to give an example here of of what is provided in occupational wages and employment statistics. So here is child, family, and school social workers, an individual occupation. So you get a list of tasks that are typical to this role, very detailed. And this is from ONET, if you are familiar with that, supplemented by data from the state of Minnesota. But ONET is the source for detailed occupational data, skills, knowledge, abilities, those type of things, but detailed tasks as well. There's a list of tasks. Um, we have the percentiles for wages, and you can list them and compare them by area, which is super useful. So here I have Northeast Minnesota, and US, and the whole wage distribution for this occupation, including mean and median. We like to focus on the median because it's less skewed by, say, one person getting a massive bonus some year, which would pull up the mean. So you can see the difference in median. You can see that 2 cents higher in Northeast Minnesota for child, family, and school social workers. So surely they're all flocking here to take advantage of that extra 2 cents per hour. I'll point out that much higher in Minnesota relative to the national median. We also break it down by industry. So I mentioned how accountants can be in any industry. Um, Child, family, and school social workers actually are in multiple industries. They're focused in education and health services, which is maybe not a surprise, but there's also a lot of them in public administration. But what may be more useful to job seekers or counselors here is seeing the difference. So say you're a business and you're in education and health services and you're trying to recruit child, family, and school social workers. You look here and you see, wow, there's quite the difference between the wage in folks that are in public administration versus education and health services. So you can take advantage of that information and react accordingly. And then second to last piece, you can look at more detailed employment and wage data by all of the areas that are available on OEWS. So you can see the median wage comparison, the number of jobs in that occupation, or sorry, related occupation, and then the projected change. So you could see what we're expecting to see in terms of growth over the next 10 years for related occupations. So maybe you look at child, family, and school social workers, and you see that it's actually going to decline. So the demand may not be as high in the future. But then you see, oh, but healthcare social workers specifically, a lot of demand there. 12% growth over the next 10 years is quite high. And this is the one I was talking about a second before, got them mixed up. This is the employment by detailed area, median wage, and then for regions, we have comparison of projections. So you can see there's strong growth in pretty much every region for child, family, and school social workers, but it's not the same. So the demand may be a little bit higher, say in Southwest Minnesota, relative to Northeast Minnesota, where it's a little bit slower. Let's go into the tool itself. I'm going to put the link into the chat, and then we can work with it a little bit. This is what the landing page looks like. You got the gray bar on the left. Again, this is not the tool itself, but we do have a little visualization here that kind of pulls information forward a little bit more quickly. So it does include a lot of the information in OEWS, but not all of it. So you can use this visualization if you want, but I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through that. If you want to get to the actual data tool, you'll click this little pill. It's just a button. And this will be the case for most landing pages. It'll be a pill or tool, like a button like this, or there'll be a tab here that says use the data tool. Training resources right here, tutorials, videos. If you want to dig into how the data are collected, how they're created, we have methodology, more data about, etc. here. But we're going to go through the dynamics of using the tool. That's what we're going to focus on. So I'm going to click on use the data tool. The big trick that trips up a lot of folks when they get into the actual OEWS tool, which is where we are now, is not selecting the geography that they're interested in. So you've got all the different geographies listed here: planning region, EDR, metro area, and balance, which is just that area minus the statistical area in it. If I'm interested in Northeast Minnesota, and let's say I want to compare to statewide and nationwide, I clicked here, Northeast Minnesota. You can also see, where each county falls by scrolling over. So I'm most interested in St. Louis County. These data don't go down to the county, but you can see St. Louis County is in EDR3, it's in Northeast Minnesota, and it's in the Duluth Metro. I'm interested in Northeast Minnesota, so I'll click that. But in order to submit it, you have to click go. If you don't click go, it won't show up in the chart below, which is what we're most interested in. So I click go. Now I've got Minnesota, US, Northeast. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit more. This table right here is OEWS. These are the OEWS data, median wages and employment. So that's what will show up in this table. And you can use this table to select detailed or more general occupational groups. So say you're just looking for one specific occupation. Let's pick nurse. I click search. It gives you a list of related occupations. I typed in nurse. I'm actually interested in registered nurses. So I select that from the drop-down, hit search. It'll filter it to just registered nurses. I still have the data for each area. If I want employment, I click on the tab up here to get the number of jobs, number of registered nurses in each of those areas. Let's say I want more detailed data, more detailed information on this occupation. No worries. All you got to do is click on this link. Click on that title, and it takes you to what we call the detailed occupation page. This is where all that data I was showing in the presentation comes from. So you've got your occupation, your standard occupational classification code. That's how they organize all the different occupations. Your description, the detailed wage breakdown. So 10th, 25th, median, 75th, and 90th. Sometimes it's useful to know that as to whether you're trying to prepare somebody that is experienced versus entry level. You can use the wage distribution to try and find what would be most appropriate. 25th percentile might be a better match for somebody that's just starting out, as opposed to somebody that's been doing it for a couple decades. Then you move up, and 75th and 90th may be more appropriate. Leading industries, the huge bulk are in education and health services. I would say even within that, health services is the main there, and the median wage is $48.19. This is statewide. So if you compare that to all, you can see that's basically the median wage for the entire occupation, the same amount. And that's because pretty much 90% of employment is in that sector. You can see the other regions, the breakdown here. Zoom out a sec. It's listed here by number of registered nurses in each area. So you can see where we're at. Duluth Metro, we got about 3,800. Northeast Minnesota, about 4,400. And then the median wages and the percent projected growth for each of the planning regions. Down here, we have related occupations. So say you got into this and you're like, no, it's not exactly what I was looking for. I actually wanted to learn about genetic counselors. I just click on that title and I get sent to that detailed occupation page where it has all the same information. This is back in registered nurses, and then this is where the tasks are. If you want to go back and start search from the main page, like this, and you still have the selected areas, selected registered nurse. Say I want to start over, you hit clear, but then you also have to select the region, the area again. So just know that. So I hit clear, Northeast Minnesota, go. You can also search if you don't want to use the drop down here and you know kind of what occupational group your occupation is in. So say I'm interested in looking for engineers. I click the little drop down here, the little triangle, that expands it to all the individual occupations within this group. And I want architectural engineers, civil engineers, electrical engineers, and I just want to look at those. So I view checked only, and now I can compare those and go in and see detailed occupation if I want to. So that's another way to explore and compare occupations. If you hit download, you may think, oh, I'm just going to download the info for these 3 or whatever ones I have selected. This downloads all the occupational data for the areas you have in here. So you'll get everything. I can show you what it looks like real quick. I click download. It'll give you, there you go. So you see Minnesota, Northwest Minnesota now, the employment count, your mean wage, hourly median. So the H stands for hourly. And then over to the right, you've got the annual wages as well. And that's by every occupation that we have data for in those areas. So if you want bulk, that's how you get bulk. Okay, I'll give you a second to kind of tool around and ask questions. So take a couple minutes to try and break something, and then let me know if you have any questions as you're tooling around a little bit. If you need a specific task, how about try and find the 75th percentile wage for licensed practical nurses or LPNs in your region. I mentioned the data home, OEWS home. It used to be called OES. We added the wages to the name recently, so it's still got OES here, but this is how you get back to the main page, the landing page, and data home if you wanted to go back. Yeah, so this is Elena. Apologies if I mispronounced your name. Great question in the chat. So Elena asked, looking for info on quality assurance manager. How might I determine which occupation group to search in? Yeah, so this is kind of a tough one. It's more just practice and experience. You see where occupational groups line up. So I wouldn't expect you to know where quality assurance manager would fall into, but the key word in what you listed there is manager. So thankfully, management is an occupational group. So if quality assurance manager is an occupation that we have data on, it'll be in management occupations. So that's relatively an easy one. If it was just like quality assurance technician or something like that, then it'd be a little more complicated. But since it has manager in there, management is its own occupational group. So looking here, just kind of scrolling, quality assurance. The title may not match up exactly. So the title that the Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics System has, or SOC code system, may not be exactly a match with what you're looking for. And this is pretty common. So that's where using this search is pretty helpful because it pulls up things that are related. So let's try it out. There's always a risk that this backfires, but let's try quality assurance. Yeah, so software quality assurance is like a common title. So that's where that is used. Industrial production managers. So that is probably the best fit for what you're looking for, actually. Compliance officers. So I'm going to select industrial production managers, hit search, and it is in that 1-1 management occupational group. So the first 2 numbers in that cell code represent the occupational group. So that is another way to find which occupational group folks or a specific occupation falls into. So thanks for that question.
Thanks so much.
Okay, I think we should move on to the next tool, if that's okay with everybody. So that's occupational employment and wage statistics. Job vacancy survey is the next tool that we're going to work on or look at. It's another survey that we conduct here at the state of Minnesota. So this is unique to us. I think some other states do something like this, but we have a very robust survey that we reach out to thousands of employers every year. We scrape data from job posting websites, Minnesota Works, a bunch of different sources to create both a count of job vacancies by planning region and state, by industry and occupation, but then we also, with that, have additional data for those job vacancies. So what is the typical wage offer? What is the vacancy rate? What is the share of those vacancies that have health insurance, require some sort of experience, require post-secondary education, things like that. So a lot of rich detail in addition to just the number of openings. This is the breakdown of job vacancies for our last survey, so 2022. We are like weeks away from releasing the 2023 data. And I think that was going to indicate that the number of job vacancies is coming down from these historic highs a little bit, but still higher than it was pre-pandemic. Most of the job vacancies statewide by industry are either in healthcare and social assistance, retail trade, or accommodation and food services. Those three alone make up more than half of all the job vacancies in 2022. The next largest being manufacturing, educational services. Those tend to track with the size of those industries' employment, so that's not a huge surprise. In Northeast Minnesota, we actually have a higher share of those industry job vacancies in healthcare and social assistance. We also have job vacancy data by occupation. So this is listing by occupational group, kind of similar: food preparation, serving related, healthcare support, healthcare practitioners make up the bulk of the job vacancies in Northeast Minnesota. So let us go to the job vacancy tool. I'm going to put it into the chat again. All right, looks familiar. Here's what the landing page looks like. A little different. Doesn't have that cool button to click, say, use data tool. The data tool link is in this little header, along with the about, some research and methodology. Again, the training resources, and then a summary visualization. So just giving you kind of the counts by occupational group, by region. And then this is super useful. This isn't easily obtainable from the tool, so this is definitely added value. This gives you the trend of vacancies for specific occupational groups over time, as well as the median wage offer, both not adjusted for inflation, but then in green also adjusted for inflation. So if you're interested in seeing what one of these occupational groups has done over time, this is super useful. I'll just click on, let's look at transportation and material moving. If I click on the bar here, it'll show up down here. You can see the demand, job vacancies, like increase in job vacancies is often an indication of increased demand. Grew significantly out of the pandemic into 2021. And the wages also bumped up correspondingly. But I digress. Let's go into the specific tool itself. All right, this is what you get to. This is the initial kind of opening page. It's statewide. A lot of tools will start statewide. If you're interested in looking at more detail, I'll show you how to get, or a different region, I'll show you how to get there. But it gives you statewide, and the table is occupations for the most recent quarter. It's 2022, second quarter. You can go back in time to see what it's been all the way back to 2001. So we've been doing this for over 20 years now. So great historical detail. The options up here, so you can change your area. So if you want to kind of start over, you hit change area. more vacancy details. So that's more data than is in this header here. I'll show you that in a sec. And then export results. Export results just gives you all of the data that's shown in the tables in the current screen. But in this table, we start with occupations. You have the SOC code. So this is the same occupational structure as in OEWS, the occupational title, the number of job vacancies, job vacancy rate. Job vacancy rate is simply the number of vacancies divided by the number of vacancies plus the number of filled jobs in that occupation. So 6.9% represents, the numerator being 184,588 and the denominator being 184,588 plus the total number of jobs we have in 2022. 6.9% is higher than we've seen in kind of the historical trend, but then you can see how that compares to all these others. We have super high job vacancy rate in farming, fishing, and forestry. Food prep, also high job vacancy, tends to be higher there, more turnover in those kind of serving related jobs. So it's not all demand. Part-time, so this is the share of those vacancies that were deemed to be part-time or seasonal and temporary, the percent that require some sort of post-secondary education, this percent that require a year of related experience or more, the share that require a certificate or license. So you'll see this being much higher in, say, healthcare practitioners and technical. Most of those jobs require some sort of certificate or license. And then the median wage offer, which is super useful. A lot of folks will ask, why is the median wage officer here, 1832, so much lower than the median wage overall? A lot of these openings tend to be skewed towards entry level. That's where more of the openings tend to be. So you'll see more a lower median wage here. It's not going to reflect all filled jobs necessarily. That's not the case for all of these, and it changes from year to year. But if it's lower, that's most of the reason why. Okay, so say we want to look at a different region. I'm going to click change area. I'm also interested in industry. Well, no, I'm interested in occupation. There's less detail for industry, which is important to know. There's different areas types listed here, but just know that it's only available for planning region. So if you click economic development region, it's going to give you the region, the planning region that economic development region is in. So I'm going to choose planning region. It gives me all the options. You can either click on the spot and it lists all the counties if you hover. We want Northeast Minnesota. I'm going to click on it, adds it to statewide, which I already have selected. If I want to keep Minnesota, I don't do anything. I just say view data. If I want to get rid of it, I highlight it and then click remove selected selection. I want to see these together, so I'm going to say view data. And just to note, I neglected to mention this, you can also do it by firm size. So if you just want to look at job vacancies for large industries or small businesses, large businesses or small businesses, you can do that as well. And then you can also focus in on part-time or full-time job vacancies. I want all, and I want occupation. So we're back at this table. Statewide's on the top. If you scroll down, you get the Northeast Minnesota data, organized the same way by occupation. Let's say I'm super interested in healthcare practitioners and technical in Northeast Minnesota. That would include like your physicians, advanced nursing occupations, those type of things. It expands it to more detailed occupational groups. So you can see the comparison there. You see NAs here and vacancy rate. We only have the vacancy rates available at the highest group level, but then if we click the plus again for the detailed occupations. So these are the detailed occupation vacancies and vacancy details. Pharmacists, so you can see how this compares, all those details. 100% here is requiring a post-secondary education for all these. That's not super surprising. A lot of these require a lot of training to get into, nurse anesthetists, nurse practitioners, a lot of physicians. Let's pick some that have a little more diversity. Say education. Up here, we're interested in preschool, elementary, middle school. So these are all the teachers' occupations, broken out by secondary, elementary, preschool. So you can see here, that wasn't a great example for post-secondary because all these occupations require post-secondary as well. So you can see the breakdown there, median wage, job vacancy rate, preschool teachers, really high demand in Northeast Minnesota, basically a fifth, a little less than that, of all vacancies and positions are open. If you want to look at the historical detail for a given occupation, you click on the code here. So you can see it turns to a finger. That means it's a link. I click on it. I could see how we compare for vacancies in the past. So 90 is the highest we've ever had for preschool teachers in Northeast Minnesota by quite a margin. Then I click back to get results. And that'll only be for the number of vacancies. That's the only historical detail we give in here. To get historical detail for the rest, you kind of have to download, export results for each quarter you're interested in. But if you export results, you get this table in an Excel file. So it's the same data, and you'll get Minnesota and Northeast Minnesota occupational detail. It won't be anything that you've like selected. It'll be all the data again. Okay, I'm going to click on the more vacancy details to show you what that includes. So it gives you the breakdown by educational requirements for each occupational group, which is pretty helpful. So you can see, where there's a focus of vocational training, kind of where there's more associate degrees, bachelor's, or advanced. Legal occupations, high proportion of those vacancies require an advanced degree, not a surprise there. Requiring work experience, you can see how that changes as well. So it might be an indication of which occupational group is maybe a little bit lower barrier to entry compared to others. And then wage percentiles. So we provide the median wage offer in the main screen, but if you want a little more detail, you can get that here. So maybe the range is wide or maybe it's narrow. And then the share of those vacancies that offer healthcare. So you can get that. That's an added piece as well. That's pretty helpful. Say I actually want to look at industry. I changed my mind. I just click that radio button up there, and then I get the same stuff for the same areas, but by industry. And I want to go back to results. And you get back again, but you're still in the industry. So you can see the breakdown as well by industry if that interests you. So take a couple minutes to play around with this one. I'll say try and find, sticking with the nursing theme, try and find the details for registered nurses in your planning region. And maybe you can look to see if it's changed, if it's higher or lower than it's been in the past. So I'll give you a couple minutes to mess around and ask any questions. Probably worth noting that there isn't a search function like there is in OEWS. So this one, it does actually help to know what your occupational group is that you're looking in. And the best way I can recommend to do that if you don't know where to start is to actually use OEWS. So search in OEWS, and then you know which occupational group you're in, and then you can come to JVS and expand. So say that quality assurance, you found out it's in management, and then you can drill down into different management types to see where. So industrial production managers, that's what we kind of thought was a good match. Here it is in the management occupations. 320 job vacancies in 2022 for that. About the same vacancy rate as the economy as a whole. The wages you can see, and then if we're interested to see what the historical trend has been, yeah, it's up there with the highest we've seen. 2017 was a little bit higher, it looks like. Okay, any last questions before we move on from JVS? Very good. Occupations in demand is the next one. So JVS, job vacancies, is actually one of the sources that feeds into occupations in demand. So occupations in demand is our listing that we produce annually of occupations by demand ranking. We create that ranking of demand by putting together information from job vacancy survey, unemployment insurance claims. So if you see a spike in unemployment insurance claims from given occupations or industries, that means less of a demand for that occupation. And then just the number of jobs in that occupation as well reflects on demand. So you put those together, and then us regional analysts also kind of apply our regional knowledge to say like, yeah, we think that this, we've heard from a lot of employers locally, like I think that this occupation should be a little bit higher in the demand ranking. We do a little tweaking around the edges that way, but mostly it's those three sources put together via a formula to create a ranking of demand. And it's a star system. So 5 stars means highest demand, 1 star means lowest demand. There are specific numerical rankings as well, but I'll say that's not as useful as just knowing whether it's 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1 stars. 3, 4, 5, we would say above average demand. It includes a lot of data that you've seen in OEWS or JVS. So in addition to the demand ranking, the title of the occupation, we include those wage percentiles, 25th and median. We include the growth expected over 10 years, percentile growth, but then also we add in the planning area projected openings. So the number of openings, whether they be from folks leaving the position, retiring, or new jobs added, that's different ways to add openings or create demand. So if you've got a lot of openings, you might have a lot of demand. We also add education requirements. So what is the typical education requirement to get into that occupation? It's not necessarily what folks have in it. Sometimes that could be higher, but it is what's typically needed to enter that profession. And then if there's any on-the-job training requirements, we put that in there too. And that tends to be just like typical on the job. It's usually short-term, long-term, that's that type of thing. Right. Do I have another? What also is super useful with occupation in demand is it's linked to education programs. For those of you that are familiar with the Career and Education Explorer, it's kind of a similar idea. So if you find an occupation in demand and you want to learn more about how maybe a client can get into it or a job seeker can get into it, you click on the education requirement and it gives you a list of specific programs in that area for that occupation. So this one here is registered nursing in Northeast Minnesota, and these are the related programs. And usefully, so this comes from the Eligible Training Providers List, or ETPL. It gives you whether it's WIOA certified. So does it qualify for funding and that sort of thing, how long it takes, what the award is, etc. But that's enough talking about the tool. Let's look at it. Okay, there's the OID tool. Similar look, landing page. The little button is back. You've got the information, methodology listed here. So methodology tells you how we exactly come up with these rankings. Go into the tool. We land on the statewide page and it tells you how many results we have. So we ranked 563 occupations statewide, and that'll change depending on what region you're in. Typically there's fewer for the planning regions, just less data. If it's too sparse, then we don't rank it. So what you'll see to start, you'll start to see familiar things now. Your SOC code, again, the first 2 digits there represent the occupational group. Your job title, current demand rank, again, not as relevant, I would argue, as the current demand indicator. That's your 5-star system. So it's 5-star, meaning highest demand is up here on top right now. 25th percentile range, median wage. We put the 25th in there as just like if you're looking to enter this occupation, that'll be more relevant than the median wage if you don't have a lot of experience, etc. The projected growth rate, and you may wonder, why is a negative growth rate here the number 2 in demand occupation? And I'll tell you, it's because there are a lot of openings projected, and even given that this is going to decline, the the bulk, just the sheer number of those jobs that are going to turn over is going to create high demand. So you have a lot of retail salespeople that come in and out, and the demand there is just created through the sheer number and amount of turnover. The education requirements and the on-the-job training requirements, registered nurses has been up here. Home health, personal care aides has been up here year after year, so demand remains high. So say you're interested in learning a little bit more about the educational requirements, this is where you click on the associate degree, and then this is that list of programs in that area you have on that page. So since it's statewide, you're going to get all of the registered nursing related programs from the eligible training provider list in Minnesota. And if you're interested in, going even further, you can click on the link and it takes you to the actual schools page, the program page. So that's somewhat useful. You can return, it's got a little more information on this. I'm happy to talk about that after the main presentation on what classification of instructional program or zip codes represent, but just know that this is how we connect our occupations to the post-secondary training system in Minnesota. So I'll return to OID results. Also useful up here is, so say I want to start a new search, that just is allowing you to choose a different region. You can focus on those that are just above average demand, so 3 to 5 stars, and export them into a Excel spreadsheet, or you could export all. And then you can filter right here. So I can filter by these wage ranges. These used to be kind of representing kind of a lower wage, medium wage, and higher. With wage growth, these wage ranges aren't super relevant anymore, but it does give you a way to filter by wages. And you can also filter by education, typical education requirements. So say I'm interested in just what requires an associate degree. I'll select that, get filtered results, and then it'll rank all of the occupations in Minnesota by that typically require an associate degree. Here again, ranked by demand. So you can see top up there is registered nurses, and then towards the bottom, what do we got? Desktop publishers. not growing a ton, not a ton of openings. So yeah, there's not a ton of demand for desktop publishers, according to our formula. What else am I? Oh, print results is an option. So let's say you're working through this with a client. This basically puts it into a printable format. If you want to get into a PDF or a sheet of paper that folks can take with them, that's what this does. And then you just print this page. So that's a useful thing as well. Return the results. If you want to search for a specific occupation, you can do that, unlike in job vacancy survey. So this is just like OEWS, the same service here for searches is allowed. And let's do the area selection. Let's say we're interested in central Minnesota this time. You can click, or you can select in the dropdown and do view data. You can only look at one at a time, so you can't compare central to Minnesota on the same screen. It's a bit of a drawback, but just know that's the case. Here's what the top occupations in demand for central Minnesota are. There's 500 of them. So you can see and compare here. One kind of useful thing is, let's say you want to change how this is sorted. You can click on the title and it will reverse the sort. If you ever see a little MN symbol, that means that the wage is not for the region, it's for the state as a whole, so you know. And that will likely be the case for the projected numbers as well. Okay, I'll give you a couple minutes to tool around in OID. Try and find the highest in-demand vocational occupation that requires some sort of vocational training. So using that in your region. And I'll say vocational training, it's listed as vocational training up here. It'll show up down here as post-secondary non-degree award. So just so you know, they're the same thing. Not going to give away the the answer for Central Minnesota. The least in demand. Yeah, interesting. Also, feel free to chime in with any questions, throw them in the chat, or just unmute yourself and fire away. I'm sure everybody will benefit. Go see Southeast Minnesota. I usually just look at my own region a ton, so it's good to get the opportunity to look at some other regions, but not too different from Northeast Minnesota or Minnesota as a whole. Home health and registered nurses are going to be top 10, I think, in every region, top 5 in every region. There's just super high demand for those, and they kind of represent different ends of the spectrum for wages, right? Or of that potential career pathway in healthcare. Right. Feel free to keep tooling around. I'm going to go on to the next tool. We're actually setting a pretty good pace here. I'm happy with how we're moving. We might get some of those extra tools. Okay, occupations in demand. So we've covered OEWS, JVS, OID. What do you get when you kind of put them all together in a new tool? You get what we call our career pathways. Oh, and you also add in information from our career force site and Minnesota Department of Education. That you get career pathways. So career pathways was a visualization that was put together, pulling from all these different sources, and then trying to create a visually appealing, more intuitive to navigate tool. And I think my colleague who built it succeeded. So it's based on OID, so you'll get the same format of occupational ranking by demand, but instead of it being organized by, say, occupational group, it's organized by color, by career cluster. So if you're familiar with career clusters, pathways, that system, this is a way to help translate from, say, folks that are in education coming through and they want to know, what cluster is my occupation going to be in? So it's getting those two systems to talk to each other. So a lot of value in that. So this tool is actually pretty popular among high schools and college users for that reason. It still has all that required education, typical required education, and then adds in links to like the career page, like a detailed career page via Career Force that has videos, and so a lot of other information. A lot of same information that we provide via our website, but in maybe a little bit more friendly to peruse format. So let's take a peek at it. And I intentionally, started out with OEWS, then did JVS and OID so that I can show you what it looks like when you put them all together in one place. This is the exception to the rule I was saying before about how you get to the landing page and then that's not the tool. This is the landing page here is the tool. So this is the tool, the career pathways tool. You still have those training resources, but you have like a little explanation on what we're representing here, where we get the information from. But if you need helpful hints and things, you got that as well. Okay, so again, available for each region. So you can pick your region here. Let's see what Southwest Minnesota is doing. We haven't picked on them yet. So I'll select my region. I can search for an occupation. in the same way as OEWS and OID. Uh, you could filter by typical required education. So let's say I want to focus on graduate degree, um, occupations that require graduate degrees this time. In the table itself, you can see the demand ranking. So again, this is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 stars. The occupational title, the typical education requirement, which should all be graduate, which it is. And then the colors here represent the career cluster. So if I hover over the bar, I get the title, the SOC code, I get the career cluster. So this is law, public safety, corrections, and security for lawyers, the demand category, how many jobs are in that region, in that occupation. So 280 lawyers in Southwest Minnesota is the estimation. Half of those jobs pay between $79,465 and $122,665 annually. So that's your 25th percentile wage and your 75th. So I think that's helpful for folks. And then your projections data. So from 2020 to 2030, we expect this occupation to add 108 or have 108 positions that need to be filled. And then that is a 6.1% growth rate. The length of the bar represents the number of jobs. So I got to show you the x-axis. So that's employment. And then the dot represents the wage. So you can compare the wages and the number of jobs as a measure of demand as well. And the big, really cool thing that you can do is hover over this. You see it turned into a pointer. If I click on the occupational title, it sends me to the Career Force occupational page, which includes a video for most occupations of what a day in the life looks like. So this is super useful if you're kind of walking through career exploration with somebody. You just want to explore kind of the high level details. This page is super helpful for that. A lot of these data you might recognize from OEWS. It's pulling from the same spot. All these data in here are from us, from LMI, but sometimes this may be an easier way to look at it. And I am all for whichever is the easiest for you or for your clients to use, go for it. I just want you to know that the data exists and what they mean. One thing that isn't provided through some of those others that is here is certification. So for lawyers, it's got all the different potential certification that might be required, education, licensing information, and you have the option to build a dashboard out here and compare occupations. So this is super helpful as well. And this opens up in a new tab, so you don't have to, go back and lose your spot. But let's say I'm interested in organizing it by, or sorting it and filtering it by career cluster. I'm interested in health science. Each of these is a career cluster. You hover over, you can find out what it represents. Health science, I don't know, a graduate degree, health science demand is for Southwest Minnesota. And you can see here, you got a good chunk that are in that 4 demand rank category. So indicating pretty high demand, quite high wages, and yeah, a decent number of actual jobs as well. So a lot of great detail condensed into one spot. So I think this is super effective in pulling together information. So you don't need to dive into a couple different tools. You can get it all right here. And then if you want to start over, you just click this little reset filter button and you get back to where you were to start with that region. Yeah, so I'll let you tool around with this one for a little bit. It's more fun to kind of click around, I think, than some of the others. But any questions on the data in here or how to use the Career Pathways tool? Well, let's say if you're a teacher or a guidance counselor, we have this DEED Career Pathways worksheet. So it's a way to work through this tool and answer questions at the same time to kind of like test your ability to use the information and what it represents. It's aimed at high school students, but anybody can use it. It's just a way to kind of learn how to use the tool, but then also find out useful information that's relevant to that student's career search or career exploration. And this gets updated annually, and it'll say down here when it's been updated last. So we just got our OEWS data updated for 2024. So it's as fresh as it's ever going to be. And that will cascade through all these other tools that reference OEWS. So this will be updated with 2024 OEWS data here soon. All right. Hearing no questions, you go back to the presentation. I mentioned Career and Education Explorer earlier. In the same way that Career Pathways pulls together data from a ton of different resources, Career and Education Explorer is meant to do the same. And it's also meant to be the main source of the eligible training provider list. Um, it got a little bit dated recently, the CEE. So we have been working on, a team of people that know how to design tools is working on it, updating it. And I've said that the last couple of years, but I actually mean it now. They actually sent out a call for feedback on a test site this week. So if you are someone that has used Career and Education Explorer in the past, have been frustrated by it, or interested in having it succeed in the update, let me know. I can send you a link so that you can test the new one and provide feedback. The one thing is the feedback is due by tomorrow, so you'll have to be quick with that. But it is being updated. It has all the information that we've talked about relative to occupation so far. It ties in detailed education. So this is meant to be the best way. So you could search either from, I want to do this type of job, and then find out which education is necessary to get there. Or you could start from the education side and say, like, I have this education, which occupations does it match up with? So you could search from both ends, which is super useful, and then get all the detail that's available for each occupation. It just used to be in a not a super visually friendly, easy to navigate format, and I think that that's what they're trying to improve this time. But the information itself is awesome. It's just how it was presented was not the most helpful. The data's still there, like the tool is still live. I'll just kind of point you and let you know that it's there, and that it includes a bunch of the same data that we've been showing in the 4 previous tools. Yep, being updated. There you go. Okay, the last tool or suite of tools that I want to cover today, graduate employment outcomes. Awesome tool. I would say one of our most underappreciated tools. In a nutshell, what it does is it connects graduates from all Minnesota post-secondary institutions by major award type. So that's like degree, instructional program, which major. And 2 years post-graduation, we're able to connect that via wage records to, say, a graduate from an architecture and related program at this school. We had 266 graduates. They're making a median hourly wage of $24.46 per hour, 2 years post-graduation. And they're working in the professional and technical services sector mostly, and then which region they most likely are in. So super useful information, especially for folks in workforce development that are like curious on where graduates locally are ending up. Are we retaining them locally by industry, or are there specific industries where it seems like we're missing out on graduates that could help out in specific employers? So great in that sense. Also great if you're coming at it from the direction of maybe being a guidance counselor or someone that is advising students that are maybe considering post-secondary education. You can look to see what the outcomes are for the peers that just preceded them. So if someone's interested in maybe going into some sort of construction trade that requires post-secondary, you can see how those graduates are ending up and see if that aligns with what was expected. And then I said associated tools, the suite, because we built kind of a bunch of spin-off tools to focus on specific aspects of geo, because there's so much going on. It's like, how do we distill this and focus it on specific questions? So most recently, or not most recently, but within the last year, my colleagues and I had built this tool, the College Cost and Earnings Comparison Tool. and it's geodata with just a few things added. So what we did is we took all that information on what folks are making 7 years. We opted for 7 years post-graduation, thinking that 7 years post-graduation, you're most likely to end up in kind of the career you're going to be in. You are kind of past that churn that happens right after graduating, trying out new jobs, etc. You may have started a family, things like that. So you're just more set in where you might be. So it's a better indication of folks' trajectory. And then we were able to break that out here by award type, so certificate, associate, bachelor's, or graduate. And graduate's pretty broad, but that's as much as we could slice it out by. And then all detailed instructional programs. So each dot here represents an instructional program by award type. So you can see the median wage, annual median wage, 7 years on the y-axis, the number of graduates on the x-axis. So if you're far to the right and far to the top, that means it's paying a high wage and there's a lot of graduates. So I'm going to show you this actually. In the one thing about this is it has to be this link. this article is the only place where this this tool exists, or this version of this tool. So you have to go to this link, and I'll make sure to send out this in the post presentation email. So this is what the tool looks like. So this instructional program here is medicine. So 7 years post-graduation from a medicine program. That means they've had time to go through residency and things like that. $275,000 median wage. And you can see the number of graduates. And what this adds in here is the typical median. That's what these gray dotted lines represent. The typical median for that award type for Minnesota graduates. So you can see if an instructional program is below or above median. That's useful. And then the second piece that we added in was cost of living. So we realized that how much you're making is not the only input in decisions. So cost of living is another factor. So what we did is we added in the cost of living for a typical Minnesota family. That's 2 adults, 1 child, 1 adult working full-time, 1 adult working part-time. So this is the median wage that you would need to be making for like 1.5 full-time workers to afford that cost of living for that family is essentially what's being shown here. And the red line represents where you get that negative net income. So below that is you're not making enough to cover your cost of living via that instructional program graduate, and above you are. It also factors in an estimation of loans, so debt, student debt. So if you know what you're going to have for student loan debt, you can input that here. So let's say you know you're spending a bunch, 100,000 over your 4 years or 2 years, or whatever. That red line will bump up a little bit because your costs are higher. You know you don't have any debt, put that in. That red line drops down. So you can see kind of how you compare. Are you going to meet an estimation of kind of basic needs, cost of living? By occupational group, and you can filter out. So let's say you're really interested in animal sciences. If you click on it, it will highlight it for each degree type. Architecture, because you have architecture in associate. Let's find one where you've got kind of business. So you've got business here, business here. So it's just like a really useful way to compare. Question from Carissa. For the Geo tool, did you say that it tracks Minnesota post-secondary graduates and where they are working in Minnesota? So graduates that work in Wisconsin or other state are not included in the data. Correct. Yep, we're unable to track them if they go work somewhere else. So it'll just show up as in a category of like we don't have information on them. But what it does do is it knows is if you continued education, so that'll show up in the wages as being low, but it shows what share of graduates continue their education in Minnesota because we have that information as well. But yeah, great point. It's not going to include folks that went to go work outside of Minnesota. And then the last tab here is showing the wage trend. So this is 2, 3, 4, and 7 years post-graduation by those award types and degree types. So you can see this one here is associate degree in engineering in general. So it starts out quite low. to get a professional engineer, you need to get a bachelor's and then pass your professional engineering certification, which takes time. So folks that get their associates are getting that or associate um, with an eye to maybe moving on to getting their full PE. But once they do, then their earning potential jumps up. So that's probably what's representing this big change here. But that's good to know, because if you're just looking at 2 years and you see 17,563, like maybe not appealing to somebody that's considering that, but you say, hey, but look at the full trajectory. If you complete the course of study, the typical course of study, this is what your earning potential will look like. All right. I know I'm running out of time here. So that is just one. We had a couple other of geo tools that are great. The compare skills tool I want to mention real quick. This is on Career Force. I'll throw this into the chat as well. Don't have time to look at it, but this is a great tool to, so say someone wants to switch careers. This is a great tool to do that, to look at like what skills might match up with other careers. So you can compare to in-demand careers, you can compare to best skill matches, and you can also compare to say if they have a career in mind, you can see how the current career matches up. So also super handy. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through it today. Other tools, cost of living, I mentioned, unemployment insurance statistics. The regional and county profiles are a great survey of all the data that we work on. I highly recommend you checking those out. They're available both for the planning region, the state, as well as individual counties. So we have those available on our website, monthly highlights, and the research that we produce as well. Super handy. I'll open it now for questions, but then also respecting your time if you need to leave. Thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate you. Hopefully this gives you a little more insight in some of the most used tools for workforce development professionals, HR professionals, and education professionals. And again, if you take away anything, just know that I'm a resource. My colleagues, my other research analysts throughout the state, also a resource. I will be following up with an email that will include a survey about this session. So keep an eye out for that. Really would appreciate if you filled out the survey. And please reach out with any questions. But I'll hang out here for the next 15, 20 minutes. If anybody has any questions, happy to answer them. But I'm going to stop the recording.